What is astrology? What are the fundamentals to astrology? How is astrology useful? Astrology does not need to be complicated or mysterious. I'll explain. There are four main parts to astrology. If you learn these basic fundamentals, you can understand any form. All astrology is built upon these basics. The fundamentals are the planets, signs, houses, and aspects. Understanding what each is and what each represents and how they operate together is the fundamental process of astrology. There are many branches and specific types and fields of astrology, but these fundamentals apply across the board. Simply put, astrology is a symbolic system attempting to understand and explain the human psyche, our behavior, and our experience of life. Astrology applies a complex and all-encompassing system and order to the processes of the human psyche and our experience of life. It is based on the locations and movements of the planets and other minor bodies in correlation to human experience. At any given point in time, if you took a snapshot of the planets in the positions they are in, this is what the astrological chart shows. For the time and place when someone is born, this is called the natal chart. The natal chart is considered to be the blueprint for the psyche and shows the complete potential of an individual, the good and the bad. Astrology is a model of the human psyche, similar to the Myers-Briggs test, the Big Five personality assessment, and even things like genetics and neural networks. Astrology is not deterministic and is based on probabilities and potentialities. What is more likely, not what is predetermined. It isn't telling you who you are. It is showing you your potential and that also you are okay how you are. Ultimately, every individual is unique and not something like some pie in the sky magical way. Like, we're genuinely unique in our psyche. And this is shown in astrology and in the birth chart. Few people have the exact same chart. And even when they do, there are environmental factors that influence the chart's expression. For the natal birth chart, this implies it shows potential, but it's not something set in stone. This is because astrology is based on archetypes and not specific traits, and again, based on the potential for the expression of those archetypes. TheAstrologyDictionary.com says, astrology is broadly defined as the study of the correlation between celestial and earthly events. It is based on the premise that when something happens in the sky, an event that has similar symbolic meaning will also occur on Earth. Astrology is the study of the placements of the planets and other minor bodies in relation to the constellations behind them, a planet in a sign. It assumes that the planets represent parts of us, our lives, and especially our psyche, the psyche being the all-encompassing mental and emotional state of an individual. Each planet represents an archetype, which can be split into many specific expressions. How a planet expresses is influenced by the constellation that sits behind it in the sky. That is the sign or zodiac sign a planet is in. The 12 zodiac signs each represent 30 degrees of the zodiac, with the circle, which is 360 degrees, split into 12 equal areas. This is different than astronomy or sidereal astrology, which uses the physical boundaries of the constellations established by the IAU. This is a huge point of contention in astrology, the two zodiacs, sidereal and tropical. All I will say about this right now is that both work, and also that astrology is not only based on the physical parameters, boundaries set by the IAU work for astronomy, but astrology is based on the balance between the 12 signs. So equal 30-degree zodiac signs is what I use, and that's what I encourage others to do. The zodiac is based on the path the sun and other planets move through the sky, and are the constellations in the backdrop of that path. That path is called the ecliptic. All the planets run roughly along this line in the sky. The signs are fixed in their positions relative to each other. Aries is always next to Taurus, which is next to Gemini, and so on. Always 30 degrees for each sign. The signs can be divided down into different groups based on qualities they share. These are the modalities and elements. Modalities are cardinal, fixed, and mutable, while the elements are obviously the traditional elements of fire, earth, air, and water. Each of these represents certain main qualities these groups share with each other. This is a common thing in astrology, grouping and classifying certain signs, planets, etc. based on certain shared qualities. And we'll see this in different spots. Carl Jung in his work saw these 4 qualities of the elements, and he, had his own interpretation of what those he grouped them in his own way. He basically saw it as, the feeling nature, the sensation nature, the thinking nature, and the intuitive nature. And, one could attribute those to fire being intuitive nature, earth being sensation nature, air thinking, and water feeling. And it's just it's just an example of how you can group qualities of the human psyche and how we behave and express that psyche, whether it's through astrology, using the language of fire, earth, air, and water, or the language that he uses, which is the feeling nature, the thinking nature, etc. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out. It's just a common thing in any field or any study of the human psyche and human behavior, and our experience of life is attempting to group similar expressions or similar qualities, similar parts of the psyche that have related qualities. So in front of those signs, those zodiac signs along the ecliptic, we have the planets, and the planets are the dynamic part of the chart, and they shift their position in relation to each other, and they're the part that is inside the ring of the signs, and then between the ring of the signs and the ring of the houses is the planets, and the planets can shift in relation to each other over time. The planets, they can move in ways where, at one point, Saturn and Pluto might be near each other, i.e. last year, but at another point in time, they might be at completely different spots in the sky relative to each other, and that can apply to every planet. And so the planets are very dynamic in the way that they move in relation to each other. That's a very fundamental part of why the planets are the main part in astrology, the distinguished part, whereas the signs represent the all-encompassing quality of everything that makes up everything about life. The planets are the dynamic mode of expression for that all-encompassing energy of each of the signs. What we see from this is the planets, and especially their position or place in the sky, matters immensely. So, a planet represents a part of the psyche. In a sign, that part of our psyche gets influenced or flavored by the sign. And that sign wants to express itself, but the signs cannot express themselves except for through a planet. And so it always, there's that dynamic back and forth where, both want to just express themselves on their own and be their own thing, but they have to always express together, so to speak. And so there's this, always read a planet in a sign. So, and this combination of the planet in a sign expresses itself in one's life through the houses. And then this is similar to the zodiac signs and how they represent the circle outside the planets. The houses represent the circle on Earth, inside the planets, so to speak. These 3 factors, the planets in a sign, in a house, in one's chart, shows how that planet will express, i.e. how that individual will behave, how the complete makeup of their psyche. It isn't exact because within a given archetype, one can behave and express that planet sign combo in many ways. And this is very important. But it will fall within the archetypes involved. So, for example, if someone has the moon in the sign of Libra in their first house, they will express the moon part of their psyche, their instinctual nature, their emotional needs, our sense of internal security, will be expressed in a way that is focused on the other, Libra, while also being about the individual's personal identity, the first house. And so, how this specifically expresses itself depends on many factors, including the environment and what is encouraged and suppressed by the individual, but they will still behave in the scope of the archetypes involved. In this case, the archetypes of Libra, the archetypes of the moon, and the archetypes of the first house. And an archetype is basically, a great example if I were to say, what is a mom, the mom archetype or the dad archetype. When I say that, you everyone has their own idea of what a mom or a dad is in their mind, It's unique to you, but at the same time, there are similarities and commonalities that we all share. And those commonalities are what create the archetype. The specifics are dependent on our own lives, our own individual experiences. It will still be within the scope of what is possible within that archetype. The aspects represent the relationship or lack thereof between the planets, or in our terms, they show how the parts of our psyche interact. The Astrology Dictionary says, an aspect is defined as a geometrical configuration between 2 planets or points in a chart that is thought to denote some type of a relationship or connection. Originally, aspects were conceptualized as the ability or inability for planets to see each other, and much of the fundamental aspect doctrine in Western astrology is related to ancient optical theories. In traditional astrology, only the major aspects were used, otherwise known as the Ptolemaic aspects. The main or major aspects in astrology are the conjunction, which is 0 degrees, or 2 planets on top of each other, the sextile, which is 60 degrees, or 1/6 of the chart, the square, which is 90 degrees, which is, 1/4 of the chart, the trine, which is 120 degrees, and the opposition, which is 180 degrees, and that's obviously just two opposing planets. And this is, again, from our perspective on Earth, so one needs to just take that into account. It's not based on like a, bird's eye view of the solar system where planets are located. It's based on from our perspective on Earth, the angles that the planets are at in the sky. So just keep that in mind. They each represent the dynamic between two parts of our psyche. So I mentioned before that the planets are the dynamic part of our psyche and they're constantly moving. Well, within that movement, they form geometric relationships to each other. And when that happens, this is when that relationship comes up between them, or they activate together in some way. And depending on the aspect, whether it's, say, a sextile or a square or a conjunction or an opposition, that indicates the type of relationship those two planets have. One more part with aspects and that I want to point out is there are kind of the considered special aspects, I guess one could call them. And these, things like the T-square, the kite formation, the yod, grand cross. And all these are terms to describe specific aspects. The big one is the stellium, which is a conjunction of 3 or more planets. And, again, it's all that is just words to describe a specific thing. It isn't like, it doesn't have any magical power. And I don't mean to say that to be insulting. It's think of it from a psychological and kind of more psyche perspective. It's just more parts of the psyche interacting together. And like I said, there are many common terms in astrology, which I did not cover here. And this is many of the just specific words for specific expressions of certain principles or certain relationships between certain signs or different groupings or classifications. So it can be fun to use special language to describe certain things in astrology. And much of this comes from medieval or ancient times. And they're not wrong. But in the same way we must not read mythology or religious texts literally, we must also take ancient astrology and connect it to our modern understanding of the human psyche. We know in modern times that all religious and mythological stories are not literal, and yet are an attempt by previous humans to explain their own psyches, the psyches of those around them, their experiences in the world around them. The planets are named for gods in ancient Roman and also Greek mythology. And other modern bodies are also mainly named for the gods or other important historical figures from many cultures. These figures represent archetypes. The gods in Greek and Roman mythology were stories meant to explain the human experience of their time, not literal, and astrology works in a similar way. A planet does not literally control or affect a person, but in the same way that mythology and religion attempt to describe our internal worlds as well as the outer, astrology does the same, but it builds upon these stories and applies a system and order to the processes of the human psyche. And finally, how is astrology useful? Astrology allows for greater self-awareness and ultimately more empathy and compassion for the self and for others. It shows us our blind spots and the parts of us we might not be aware of. So many issues for individuals and in society stem from insecurity and lack of self-awareness. Better self-awareness and self-acceptance helps to change this. Astrology can show us areas of growth or strengths we didn't know about and provide clarity with both. Astrology allows and acknowledges that every single human being is an individual. And through the natal chart, the blueprint for the psyche, we can know ourselves fully and understand ourselves fully and express who we are fully, our own unique individuality. This sounds cheesy, but I mean it fully. Instead of everyone putting energy into being like others, being something they're not, we can put that energy into understanding and expressing ourselves. We look to others because we don't know who we are or what our purpose is. We can use astrology and the birth chart to help learn these. Adding to the usefulness of astrology, it can help humanity as a whole. Using mundane astrology and the study of transits, the movement of the planets currently, we can plan and time things for the best and know what the psyche of the world, so to speak, is like at any given day. Looking back at history, when planets were in certain signs or when planets made aspects to each other, can teach us about potential future possibilities when these same things happen again. Of course, the exact same things won't happen again. I mean the literal things that happened in history. But similar to the natal chart, we can consider the archetypes of the planets and signs involved and take educated guesses of the potentials for the future. The archetypes of the signs and planets will express themselves, and they must express themselves. But how they do is up to us. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Cheers.